Hello and welcome to the Political Dispatch, the podcast that explores big issues and ideas in a conversational way.
My name is Lily Mott.
I'm Sidd Kurapati.
In each episode, one of us will guide you through a compelling topic examining the politics, policies, and key players involved.
Today's episode is the first of a two-parter focused on the 2024 US presidential elections. Each of us are going to talk about a key moment or event that we feel might shape the final result, and also do a little bit of an explainer about the election system in the United States.
So we're all in different locations. I'm in London, Sid is in Cardiff, and Tom is in a mystery location. Tom, where exactly are you?
So, through the magic of motel internet, I'm in Atlanta, Georgia. After this, I'll be checking out of here and leaving my stuff at an apartment in Midtown, and then going to the Jimmy Carter Presidential Center. We're a big fan of the 39th president, so I'm looking forward to that later on.
That sounds so great. And we appreciate that the internet might be a little bit iffy. So if it goes in and out, it's okay. Hopefully my editing skills will make up for it, Tom. We'll see.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, your awesome skills will make me sound as clear, as if I'm back in Cardiff. Yeah.
So let's kick it off with you. What have you got for us about your amazing US trip so far?
Yes, well, I thought I'd start on this quite unique recording that I took that I made for last Sunday. Let's have a listen. Okay, that was the sound of the hustle and bustle outside Madison Square Gardens on Sunday, the 27th of October. I was walking to Penn Station and I saw a load of people wearing red Make America Great Again hats. And then I saw a huge digital billboard of Donald Trump with his fist closed. And I did a quick Google and I realized it was the crowd gathering for the rally that would be happening later that night. So entirely by chance, both the 45th president and I were in the Big Apple at the same time. I recorded, a couple of videos of the crowd. I took in the scene and then I wandered in completely the opposite direction into Central Park and the Metropolitan Museum of Art. The image of Trump, being imperious on that big electronic screen in the heart of New York, one of the most democratic friendly cities in the United States, stuck with me all day. That block surrounding Madison Square Gardens was Trump territory, a nation of its own, the not so democratic Republic of Make America Great Again. And his fans and supporters were donning their MAGA red caps. They were excited. There was a buzz about the place, and New Yorkers and tourists were perplexed by the gathering, some curious, some dismissive, some annoyed. And I felt a sort of mix of excitement and trepidation being there. The political geek in me was intrigued and I wanted to stay, maybe to interview people there, but instinct told me to leave. So I left. And later that evening, after a lot of walking in the city, I returned to my motel and I watched the Trump-friendly news channel, Fox News. And I was intrigued by what Trump might say at the rally. He was speaking just like 10 minutes walk away from my hotel, which was quite wild. And I watched Melania, Trump's wife, give a brief speech to introduce her husband. When Trump arrived on stage, he gave his wife an awkward hug. They kissed awkwardly. She stood there clapping for a couple of minutes and then she left stage and let her husband start his speech. And in his opening salvo, Trump said, "With your vote in this election, I will end inflation. I'll stop the invasion of criminals coming into our country and I'll bring back the American dream. We need the American dream to come back home. Our country will be bigger, better, bolder, richer, safer, and stronger than ever before. This election is a choice between whether we have 4 more years of gross incompetence and failure, or whether we'll begin the 4 greatest years in the history of our country." He then went to sort of sketch out his immigration policy. He made claims that criminals were coming from Congolese prisons and elsewhere. He had charts and videos backing up his points, conveniently clipped together videos of his opponent. After 15 minutes of watching, I got a good idea of what Donald Trump wanted to achieve in his second term as president of the United States. The social and legacy media all zeroed in on one aspect of this big rally, and it was big. You filled out Madison Square Gardens, but it's also worth thinking that the Republicans, bussed in lots of people from outside of New York, so it wasn't necessarily just New Yorkers that were there, but that the media really zeroed in on Tony Hinchcliffe's, one of Trump's warm-up acts, who called Puerto Rico an island of garbage. And this lit up the socials, Democrats jumped on it. AOC, Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez, and the vice presidential candidate, Tim Walz, they were doing this live stream on Twitch playing Madden 25, which was quite inventive. And they were talking about it. The Latino and Hispanic communities rightly voiced their outrage. But the next day, Joe Biden put his foot in it by labeling Trump supporters garbage. The White House released a transcript to provide context for his comment. And then Trump sort of responded by driving around in a garbage truck, for example. I think the comedian's labeling of Puerto Rico as garbage is a tangible example of what acolytes of Trump think. And it's sort of a bit of a pulling back of the curtain. And a lot of what Trump was talking about was dark. He talked about mass deportations. He talked about the alternative history where Ukraine wouldn't have happened, the October the 7th wouldn't have happened, Afghanistan withdrawal wouldn't have happened in the same way if he was still president. So yeah, that's sort of my take on it and that experience. It was quite bizarre, really, being there, purely by accident and not planned. Yeah, so yeah, I don't know what you guys thought.
Well, Tom, that was really nicely put, and I think you really articulated that about how the rally went about and what it made you feel, and what was the whole atmosphere that was there at Madison Square Gardens, which is clearly on an all-out attack against the Harris and Walz campaign. And I think, like we discussed earlier, it was all about that you need to get the legacy media, the online, the social media, the entire attention just on that rally, and they just went all out on with a blitz. And interestingly, from all the controversial statements that were made during that rally, they've only denounced one particular statement, which was Tony Hinchcliffe's statement on Puerto Rico, but they didn't really, denounce or, move away from all the other controversial things that were said. There was a lot of language that was used, which was, very similar to what the KKK used to say, or, really racially charged, phrases and words or innuendos that we used. So it's hard to sort of imagine that, how charged this election has been, and I think the attack didn't really stop there as well. So this past, couple of days back, or yeah, just a couple of days back, Trump even went ahead and to woo in the Indian American voters as well by really putting a whole thing that, I'm going to protect Hindus in Bangladesh, and this would have never happened if I was the president. And and he kind of reached out to the whole protect the Hindu sentiment that a lot of people in India have, and a lot of Indian Americans also have. So, and then he finally finished off this long tweet that he put out on, and then it's like, oh, also happy Diwali to everybody, you know. So, he's really going out there, and he's going all out. So, um, it's been a strange election, I would say. It's really tossed and turned, according to me. I had an interesting experience where I had visited the United States in the same city, in the New York City, back in 2017. This was after the elections in December, and back then New York didn't really seem um, like they were going to really support Trump in any way. But this time I was there in September, and I got to see a very different side of New York. And I just randomly ventured into a lot of the souvenir shops to see what is really selling from an economics point of view, and what are people really stocking up this time. And it is loaded with MAGA merchandise and Trump merchandise and all sorts of stuff, from baseball bats to eight balls to the works. And yeah, it really seems like there's a lot more support for Trump in New York City this time. It's unlikely that he's going to win the New York State because it's traditionally blue, but he's definitely going to get a lot more votes there. And I think it's going to be an extremely, extremely tight race this time.
So I actually was in the US last week, and I got to cast my ballot for this election with a bunch of my friends as well. And we all my friends live in DC, but we're all from different parts of the country. So that was really interesting as far as the initiatives that were on each of our ballots, but also maybe what our different ballots meant for the presidential election, because some of them live in swing states, or they're citizens, they're registered in swing states. And so that was different because I am registered in Colorado, which is blue, and it definitely will be blue in this election. But for my friends, they're from North Carolina and Pennsylvania, which are two of the swing states that will be really important to watch on Tuesday as we start to see some results rolling in. But their ballots were really, really interesting because, of course, they were taking it very seriously as far as making sure that everything, all of the T's were crossed, the I's were dotted, everything was perfect and ready to go with their ballots, which, as was I think that it's incredibly important. But I do think that it is just kind of a symptom of the Electoral College in the US, where their ballots may have a much bigger influence on the presidential race than mine. However, that doesn't mean that their ballot is any more important than mine as far as what I was voting on. And I'll talk about this a little bit later, but I voted on a
True.
lot of different ballot initiatives and different representatives. And so that was a really amazing experience, though, to vote. This was not my first time voting, but it actually was my sister's. And so that was really cool for her to be able to
Mhm.
participate in something that's as important as this. I do think it's interesting as far as the personal association with this election and the feelings that are attached to our ballots and to this cycle in particular. We talked about it a little bit before we hit record, Tom and Sidd, but just the idea that so many people have their own feelings tied up in some of these policies and tied to some of these candidates. I think this isn't necessarily new in American politics, because I do think that we're very, very passionate about our political system and about our democracy. And I think that's why sometimes it thrives, and historically sometimes our system has been productive and it's been very positive for its citizens, but also at the same time I think that level of passion is very dangerous. So I think that while we're very passionate about democracy, it can also be a very scary thing, and I think that we're starting to see that as we get closer. I think that I'm very nervous about what next week is going to look like as far as the country, my country, I guess, the country that obviously I don't live there now, but I am just kind of nervous about, we saw the insurrection, obviously, the last presidential election cycle. And so now I think either side that wins, I think there's going to be a lot of frustration for people. And I think that that's just going to be really interesting to see what happens. I don't really want to make any predictions because I don't want to put it out there, but I'm very nervous, I guess. That's what I'll say. I think it also makes me nervous because if Trump doesn't win, there has been sentiment building around him, right-wing sentiment and racist messaging, as you mentioned, Sid, and I think also sexist messaging. And
Yeah.
there's been a lot of tension that has been channeled around Trump as a person. And so I'm really nervous about, if Trump is not elected, where that's going to go. I think that's something that I the insurrection was the result of that the last time, where people were really frustrated and they didn't really know what to do. So they questioned the validity of the vote and the validity of the results of the election. And then we saw that. So I'm just wondering what happens this time when Trump is also facing jail time, obviously. What happens when, he doesn't win and then theoretically, that's what he's facing. He's facing actually like incarceration. What are his supporters going to do at that point? Because there's no one that's arisen in the same way that Trump has to replace him. We could say like JD Vance, but he's definitely not in that position that Trump was in 2016, as far as like the following and the support around him. So I think I'm not really sure where that support would go. And that's what makes me really nervous, as far as just all that energy that's been channeled into Trump's campaign and into his potential presidency. That idea of, we're going to entirely change what's happened in the last 4 years and we're going to make America great again. And, all of that sentiment, where is that going to go? It's kind of like a pressure keg in my mind of just what's going to happen following the election. So yeah, do you guys have any thoughts on that? That was like very dark, but what do you guys think?
No, I think it's great to get your insight and your feelings into it, because I think from our perspective, we're, Sid and I take an interest in this, but it's not our country. So it's sort of easier for us to talk about the darker consequences, because although it will affect our world, it doesn't affect our immediate, life choices, and there's so much at stake. A couple of things I sort of want to pick out is that over the last couple of election cycles, there's this messaging that's gone out from the Democratic side in particular, like, democracy is on the ballot. And I wonder if that messaging is still getting through to people, or whether people are becoming sort of numb to that idea. And, as time passes, democracy is still there, and it's like, hey, the sun rises and we're fine, sort of thing. But also this, when we talk about media diet and the news which people are consuming, and where people are getting their information from, if you were to look at Trump-based, leaning media, they will say, oh, Trump's on for, 97% chance of winning. And so you present this inevitability, and if that inevitability doesn't turn out, or whether that victory doesn't come, then what? Because you've got a lot of people that have thought, hang on, I thought this was going to be a done deal. Whereas on the Democratic side, a lot of people are very concerned about it being a very tight race. So there's a bit more like, if Trump wins, there'll be disappointment, but they've had all this information here which suggests that it's going to be very close. Whereas on the other side, it seems there's a different reality going on. And yeah, I think that's a pretty dangerous thing to be happening.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with you on that, Tom. I think it's easier for us to be a little more objective on the election and how the campaigns are going. And while, of course, the Trump campaign has the ability to even rouse emotions, within us as well, just because of how they run it. You do kind of think about what's next after the election is done, and how much of it was actually just campaign rhetoric, and how much is actionable stuff. And the line between them is actually very blurred, in today's age of elections. So you really don't know what to expect. And I wonder if, knowing the fact that all the polls are saying that it's going to be a tight race, it's going to be, doesn't, it's still undecided as to who's going to be winning this, and it's going to be like a photo finish. I wonder if that prompts more people to go out there and vote, which is probably one of the best things, because at the end of the day, you would probably want all of them to vote regardless. And that would be a very interesting thing to notice as to what the voting outcome, I mean, the voting percentage would be this time. Do people think it's a foregone conclusion? Do people think that, hey, we got to go out there and vote no matter what? And whoever you're voting for at the end of the day, you got to vote. So yeah, it's been a highly, like I said, I think it's been a highly charged election, one that I haven't seen in a while. It's also been, I thought the last election was highly charged, but this one's really gone ahead, and this one's gone way ahead of it, and not so in a good way. It's you don't really expected something like this, and especially after the whole vice presidential debate, which was actually quite nice to watch. It was a lot more civil than other presidential debates that have happened of late, but to see that it's gone back to the same trajectory of a very negative campaign sort of a thing. I think the result day and the voting day is going to be uh, highly interesting for us to watch and comment upon, I guess.
I wonder if, because we talked a little bit already about the Electoral College. Should we go into the detail of what the Electoral College is? Because it might be a bit alien to quite a few people.
Absolutely. I think it'll be a good sort of a run through of the system that the United States has. So, to become the US president, Kamala Harris and Donald Trump are competing for the total number of votes. But more importantly, they are aiming to win the Electoral College vote.
The Electoral College is the system used in the United States to elect the president and the vice president. And rather than a direct national popular vote, the Electoral College allocates votes based on each state's population and representation in the United States Congress, which is a very controversial topic. And it's been debated because it gives outsized influence to some of the smaller states, but that's something that we can talk about on a later episode.
Absolutely. So the successful candidate has to secure a majority of 270 out of 538 electoral votes, and a successful presidential candidate does not have to win the popular vote to win the overall election. How about that?
How about that? So for example, in 2016, Hillary Clinton won more votes overall in comparison to Donald Trump, but Donald Trump won more of the Electoral College, which led to him winning the whole election.
True. So for all the millennials and the Gen Z kids out there who are planning to vote, I'll give you a Harry Potter reference over here. It's like Victor Crumb gets the snitch, but Ireland still wins the Quidditch World Cup.
There you go.
Yeah. Finally got the Harry Potter reference, and you've been waiting 8 episodes, Sid.
I know. It's
You've
been
been
a
sitting
while.
on that.
Yeah. Anyway, going back. So voters in each state cast ballots for president, but they're technically voting for a slate of electors pledged to their chosen candidate. The candidate who wins the popular vote in a state generally wins all of that state's electoral votes, except in Maine and Nebraska, which allocate some by congressional district.
And during the election coverage, you might hear the term swing state, which I also mentioned earlier. And this is a collection of 7 states within the US that will likely have a great impact on the election results. And we're all kind of looking at them as far as, and so have the campaigns. They've been pumping millions of dollars into these states to try to win voters. These states are Arizona, Georgia, Michigan, Nevada, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. And all of them are very diverse politically. Even if you think about some of these states, the one that I'm most familiar with is Pennsylvania. And so what's interesting about a lot of these is that they have large urban centers where you get a lot of Democrat voters. But then, of course, they also have large rural populations as well. And so when you see that combination, it's going to lead to this purple color across the entire state where there's not a lot of connection between those two areas because the urban voters stay in the cities and the rural voters are out on the outskirts and like in Pennsylvania, usually on their farms or in smaller towns outside of the city. So yeah, I think it's very interesting to look at all of these places and see why they are the way they are. And Tom is going to be in Georgia, which is very exciting because he's going to see how this all unfolds. But yeah.
And Atlanta's another good example where you have, very, very Democrat city, but then you don't need to go many miles outside of it to be surrounded by red, by Republican. So they're like so diametrically opposed that then it becomes incredibly close as a result because you've got very even split on both sides. Yeah.
So, when you have like about 7 states, which are like more like purple states and they're swing states, traditional swing states, Does that mean that the other 43 tend to vote exactly for that particular, they're either red or blue on most occasions? Like I've only seen like California be blue most of the times. Similarly to New York. Do you remember any particular state which was like a major one, but they went with a different choice in a location in one election? What do you say, Lily?
I think that this is a great place to just kind of harp for all of our like international listeners. So many of our states are so diverse, even just like from each other. I think about Colorado a lot, obviously. But we have a lot of rural population. Like we have a very high rural population. Actually, where I'm from is technically rural. And it's interesting because I think a lot of times the issues that people vote on, even though they might traditionally be conservatives, maybe there's an issue that they care about more that then sways them to be liberal or to vote Democrat. So for example, like in Colorado, we actually used to be very purple. I think that we might have been a swing state for a while, but then as climate change started to become a bigger issue, all of our tourism is based on skiing and snowboarding. And so, our biggest issue is climate change as far as even like our exports and just what we do as a state. It's all based on nature and how beautiful our state is. And so that became this huge, huge voting point for people, which now we're solidly blue. But I think that you would have to look, I guess, at the issues that people care about and like that influence them on a daily basis. So like climate change. I'm also thinking, I guess, in the South, for example, like things might start to change as different groups of people migrate in and out. But yeah, I guess that is really interesting. I feel like we could do an episode where we break down like all like different states and like their interesting voting patterns. Did you want to say anything, Tom? Now that you're
Yeah,
there, a taste of it.
yeah. I think Georgia's a really good example where Biden was the first Democratic president to win Georgia as a state since Bill Clinton did in the 90s. And Georgia had been shifting to Democrats through prominent people like Stacey Abrams running for governor and a lot of like organizing on the ground, which has now switched it. So it's becoming a purple state. So it is possible to make those states change. And Governor Walz is he's the governor of, is it Minnesota?
He is.
Yeah.
Even though he's a Democrat, when he was in the House of Representatives representing his district, it was very Republican district that he was fighting. So it can be at a high level, it can be a particular color, but then actually when you break it down, it can be something else. And it's also worth reminding folks that, for example, California, two of California's most famous presidents are Ronald Reagan and Richard Nixon, both of whom are Republicans and were very prominent in California. And even the most recent Republican governor was Arnold Schwarzenegger, for example. So history, over time, political history does change. And the South used to be Democrat. But it switched during the 1960s, during the civil rights sort of side of stuff. So the dynamics can shift over time. And I think if you just sit there and think, well, my vote's never going to change anything, it's a bit like saying, well, if I don't switch off my my lights, it's not going to at night, it's not, or my heating or whatever, it's not going to have much of an impact on the environment. But if everyone feels the same way, nothing's going to change. I think it's about being patient with it, and going out to vote in itself is a really important thing to do, as much as a statement as anything else.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And coming back to the swing states, so the polls from Project 538, which seems to be a decently researched polling system that they have, state that Trump and Harris are evenly placed in the purple states right now of Nevada and Pennsylvania, while Harris leads in Wisconsin and Michigan. Trump is leading in Arizona, Georgia, and North Carolina. Other polls state similar figures, projecting a photo finish to this highly charged election. But it is important to understand that at the end of the day, polls like this one are just polls, and their voting is impacted primarily by the issues that affect the voting populace of the United States. A Gallup poll from early October states that the health of the economy is the top priority for voters right now, with democracy in the US being a close second. In a joint third, we have Supreme Court justices' pick of each of the candidates and national security. Others on that list include immigration, education, healthcare, and abortion. As of this past Thursday, 62.7 million people have already cast their ballot. But if you haven't, you need to go vote as well.
And I think that this is a great place to bring back that issue that I talked about before, where I think a lot of voters feel like if they don't live in swing states, your vote doesn't matter as much, but it definitely does. Your vote matters when it comes to the popular vote, as we discussed, because that's going to be an important factor when we look at national trends and we try to figure out how this election happened. There have been a couple elections in recent history that have been determined where the popular vote was different from the Electoral College decision. And so that ultimately could lead to some form of reform, which I think we're definitely debating across the country, and that's something that might happen eventually. Anyways, all this goes to say your vote does matter when it comes to the popular vote. And there's also so many other items on your ballot that will impact you and your family and your friends and your state and the wider US. And as we've discussed, ultimately the wider world as well. In some states, voters are weighing in on changes to their state constitutions and have the opportunity to elect local and state representatives. And all of those people have the ability to impact your day-to-day life in a way that the president will not be able to. So when we're thinking about smaller changes as far as your mayor or your state representative, that's an important vote that you get to cast, and it's going to impact your life a lot. And some voters will have the choice to vote on constitutional amendments, and that's also very important because some states are codifying issues like abortion into their own state constitutions, which will protect people in case the president is trying to make changes. I'm not gonna go into it in more depth than that, but those changes are going to be really important. And all of us have the ability to make our voices heard. If you can vote, you definitely need to vote. If you don't do politics, politics will do you. We'll just leave it with that from my end.
Thank you, Lily. I think it's really important to get that message out there to anyone listening. If you have a vote, use it, because I think we all take it for granted, and people like us, we're very interested in politics. This sort of makes us, what makes us tick. But for a lot of people, it might seem a bit alien or not for you. But it is really important that if you have a vote, you vote all the way down the ballot paper as well. It's very different in the United States in comparison to the UK and other places where you're voting for a whole raft of people that on the outside might not seem to influence a great deal, but actually when it comes to your state, they can have a really big say and an impact on your life and your way of life overall. Yeah, I think that's a great way to conclude this episode. We'll pick up after the result, and we'll do a little bit of analysis and see how things are going. I'm going to spend a couple of days in Atlanta, and then I'm off to DC. So I'll actually be in DC when the results roll in. So that will be interesting to see what happens. Thanks, guys. Anything else? Any other comments?
No, I think we're good.
And we would appreciate it, as always, if you subscribe to the podcast, and we'd love to hear your thoughts and feedback. So please leave us a rating or a comment. We'd love to know your thoughts on the election, and maybe we'll also discuss some topics. If anybody wants us to talk about specific things, let us know, because we can discuss that when we do our wrap-up episode next week. Let us know, leave us a comment. There's information about how to contact us in the description of this episode. So if there's anything in particular you want us to talk about, we totally can. And yeah, that's all from me.
Thanks, everybody. We'll see you after the results are out.
Bye.